Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Knights of Den podcast. I am Sayre Bedinger, and here with me, as always, Brandon Keckler. Brandon, it's great to talk to you today, bro.
It's great to talk to you as well. We had a little bit of a prolonged hiatus. I was on vacation, and we just had a lot going on. And then, Broncos country went through a brutal stretch during that period of time.
I know. It's been rough. Nope. The brutal stretch is only really beginning, I feel. And the big news, obviously, today, if you're listening on the day of the NFL trade deadline, obviously the biggest news of the day, no matter what happens between now and the end of this podcast, is the fact that Demaryius Thomas, Denver Broncos wide receiver of 9 years, has been traded to the Houston Texans for a 4th-round draft pick. And then I think the two teams also swapped 7th-rounders. So Texans made the Broncos move down in the 7th round as a little bit of a kick them while they're down type of thing, in my opinion. Just give us your 7th rounder. We'll move up in the 7th round, and we'll give you our 4th for him. I don't know.
Who knows? Maybe, at this point, I'm not too optimistic on this season, but they only have 2 more wins than us.
That's right. Right.
Maybe we just jumped up in the 7th round.
That is a fair point. And we have a chance to potentially improve that draft pick a little bit this weekend, as the Houston Texans are ironically the first opponent for the Broncos in Denver.
That's crazy.
After this trade. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that before.
I don't know either. I was just wondering that. Like, I know it's probably happened, guaranteed, because trades are made often of kind of lesser, not lesser players, but just lesser commodities as far as like popular players or whatever. I don't know if I remember a time in recent history where an elite player was traded. And a lot of times you're looking on the schedule like, oh, do they play that team again this year? And that happens a lot. Where line, you see them, they'll play against their former team. But I don't know about like within less than 7 days of playing the team, 5 days later, he's playing the team he just left, especially a high profile player like Demaryius. I don't know if that's ever happened.
Yeah, I can't think of a time. And so, like you said, there's always that, is this player on the schedule later this year? Yeah, that's the natural thing to do, is look for that. But I mean, it's the literal next team on the schedule. I don't know if maybe that happens in baseball or basketball, but I can't remember ever seeing that in professional football. And so, especially with a high profile player like this, like Demaryius Thomas. And so let's talk a little bit before we get into the details of the trade. I think that it's important that we remember the good from Demaryius Thomas's career with the Denver Broncos, and maybe one day we'll devote an entire episode to Demaryius, because he did mean so much to this team for the better part of the last 9 years. I mean, both on and off the field. So I don't know if anything pops into your mind right away, other than the big play from 2011. But we can talk about that if you want to. If that's your biggest memory, let's talk about your number one Demaryius Thomas memory.
That's definitely my number one Demaryius Thomas memory. I would say, without a doubt, without a question, I think that's everyone in Broncos country's favorite memory. I was at my aunt's house. I was explaining the overtime rules. We talked about this in the Tebow podcast that we did earlier this summer, and I couldn't even get done explaining the rules of the new overtime when I turned around and Demaryius Thomas, Demaryius stiff arm, is running down the field and scoring that touchdown. And then it's funny, he didn't even because the overtime rules were different, he didn't even know the game was over.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, no, you just won it. You just won it for us. So that's great. That's definitely my number one.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. I can't think of anything that was more intense, emotional, shocking. Just the whole combination of everything that happened on that play. You're winning a playoff game against, weren't the Steelers the reigning Super Bowl champions at the time?
I think so.
So, I mean, you're beating the reigning Super Bowl champions at home in a playoff game that nobody expected you to be in, nobody expected you to compete in, and then all of a sudden, here comes this slant play, and Demaryius does exactly what everyone thought he could do coming out of Georgia Tech way back when. He turns on the Jets and takes that 230-pound body all the way down to the goal line. And so it was very, very exciting to see. And it's hard to look back on that now and not kind of get a little emotional about it.
Yeah.
That's boy, that feels like it was just a couple of days ago. It feels like it was just yesterday, but it you know.
And I've been wearing my one jersey that has been the most consistent for me over the past, 5, 6, 7 years has been Demaryius. So I mean, I've been wearing that week in, week out. I got a Vaughn Super Bowl one now, and I did find my old Terrell Davis jersey, which has an extra value this year, Philip Lindsay. So I've been wearing those, sporadically. But I mean, it's been me and my DT jersey almost every single Bronco game for the past 7 years, and I'm wearing it right now, man. I wore it last Sunday because I had a feeling that, this was going to end up being the last time we see him in a Broncos jersey. So I wore it strong and I wore it proud. And he's definitely, I think, character-wise, that's the thing I'm going to remember the most about DT is just like, that guy, he always had that just like that smile, man. Like he was always beaming. That I can just see it vividly in my head, that Demaryius Thomas smile. And off the field, he was just such a good guy. Seemed like he just had a really good heart. I loved watching all of his documentaries about the stories with his mom and everything that he went through, and just his whole story has been really cool. Even how he recovered fast from that injury. I remember I had just been, just really been praying for him and just hoping the best for that situation. And I know a lot of Broncos country, a lot of people were, and I remember him just bouncing back from that and just coming back strong, and all those screen passes and dumping them off to, just dropping it off the DT short, and what he would do making those plays happen. You don't really see that too much these days from, big receivers. You see it from a lot of small wiry guys, or, the wider, catching running backs. But man, just those are the things that are going to stick with me the most as far as Demaryius Thomas is concerned. Just good character, good off the field guy, strong, big body dude that would just go up and freaking snatch those balls and take it to the house with that strength, man. So, it's a bummer. I feel like it's good to start on this note, thinking about a lot of these positive things, a lot of the stuff that sticks out to us about DT, in light of this recent within the hour trade. And, but at the same time, there's reasons that, we kind of needed to move on from this, but it's still an emotional thing that I think is going to take some time, kind of like you said before the podcast, to really sink in and really just, it's going to take some reflection as we move past this. Cause it's like the cold logic of it is like, this is a good move for our team.
Yep.
Dude, the human soul that fought for the Broncos for a long time that I treasure, man. I had a great time watching this dude for years. He's been one of the last things he's been one of the most consistent things about the Broncos for, about a decade. So,
man,
it's hard on the heart, man.
It is. I'll give a couple of moments that I really enjoyed from Demaryius Thomas in his career too. I think it was the very first game, or let me think back now. Yeah, it was the very first game of the Peyton Manning era, 2012 against the Steelers. And Demaryius, I don't remember if it was the very first play from scrimmage, or I don't remember exactly what play it was, but I remember the Broncos got the ball, and it was one of Peyton Manning's very first passes of his Denver Broncos career, went to Demaryius on a screenplay against the Steelers, and he took that one like 80 yards to the house.
I love that one. I remember
that was such a cool moment to feel like, okay, this guy's unstoppable. It felt like the Broncos had, because at that time the Brandon Marshall trade was still pretty fresh. It was still that was still a pretty fresh wound at the time. Yeah. And so to see Demaryius really coming into his own, I remember that was the year too where a lot of people cashed in on his low value in fantasy football and brought him onto their squads. And I was one of those people who was like, you know what, like this guy's going to be really good, especially with Peyton Manning. And that was just so satisfying as Broncos fans to see him really establish himself right there, as like that play in 2011 against the Steelers wasn't a fluke. This is the beginning of something brand new. And then to see him do that, and then also to kind of at the back end of, I think this stands out to me personally as one of the last moments that Peyton Manning was great. And it was Peyton Manning's record-setting touchdown pass against the San Francisco 49ers, which he threw to Demaryius Thomas. And it's one of the toughest catches, I'm sure, of Thomas's career. If you look back at all the different plays that he made, I would bet you that he would say, as far as difficulty level and pressure of the moment, I bet you he would put that one in the top 3 or the top 5 as far as most difficult catches that he made, and what that meant for. I mean, that was probably the highlight of that season in retrospect, because they didn't do anything in the playoffs, and so that touchdown and that, honestly, that game was so much fun, because there were still people doubting the Broncos and whether or not they could beat Kaepernick and the Niners and those guys, and just, I don't know, there were so many moments where Demaryius Thomas was part of the Broncos really fulfilling, like, hey, the expectations should be high because we're good, and that was another one that really stands out to me, and I'll remember that play for a long time. So, man, crazy to see that he's now gone to another team, and another fan base is going to get to be excited about him being there. And I'm sure as the Texans get acquainted to Thomas, they're going to look through all of his career highlights, and they should believe that they're going to get the best out of him, because I hope that they do. But
I really hope that they do as well. It'll be interesting. They definitely have a void with Will Fuller going down, and they're in playoff position. So this was a really good trade for them. They have Hopkins, so obviously Demaryius is coming in, and he's playing a different role. He's going to play a different role than Fuller played, and he's going to play a different role than Hopkins plays. But he's definitely going to be an awesome piece for them, and that's where I think, again, just kind of before we talk about some of the reasons why this trade happened on our end, it's exciting to see that he's going to go somewhere where, maybe here he was a bit more of a liability in the salary cap department, and there's a lot of kind of rumors swirling around the trade. Well, now he gets to go to a team and settle in, and at least for a couple years, he's a Houston Texan, and he's got a good he doesn't have to worry about any quarterback problems, in Houston, as long as Deshaun Watson stays healthy. So he's probably got an upgrade at quarterback, and definitely probably an upgraded quarterback. And so it's exciting for him. I hope he does well. Hope he finishes his career strong, man. That's what I want. I think we're in a bit of a building phase, and this was a necessary move, but I'm glad that DT is going to go somewhere and get an opportunity to maybe play for a playoff contender, which he's not doing. He's not doing being on the Broncos. So DT, I want him to finish strong, and then I want him to come back home to Denver and live the rest of his life, his post career in Denver.
And I think I would say that's a pretty high likelihood. I think that he will be kind of one of those Denver lifers. I mean, this is a fresh wound right now, and make no mistake about it. But Thomas has spent the last, like we said, 9 years in Denver. He's going to go down as one of the best wide receivers in Broncos history. To be honest with you, 2020 rolls around and he's still 30. What will he be in 2020? He'll be 32 years old. I'm just saying, I mean, he'll be a free agent in 2020 again at the age of 32. I mean, your career is not over unless he says it over at that point. And so there's a chance that he could come back. You never know. He's got the connections in Denver. If the Broncos are able, this is the key right now. The Broncos are doing this. Let's talk about that for a second. Why are the Broncos doing this? I think the number one motivation behind the Broncos doing this is so that they can build for the future. They want to build a contender. They want to put together a team that's worthy of competing for titles. And no offense, but they're not in that position right now. And Demaryius Thomas doesn't have time for that. He's 30 years old, going on 31. He needs to be on a team that can compete now. And they're giving him that opportunity, whether or not we like the return value or not. I'm not a huge fan of getting a 4th-round pick for a guy who means that much to the franchise. I'm just not. But I think from Thomas's perspective, as much as he would like to be a Bronco for life, and I mean, I don't know how much does that mean to players nowadays to say that they played for one team their whole career. That seems to be kind of antiquated a little bit, but I think Thomas seems like one of those guys who would have probably done that. But I think for me, this means that the Broncos are they're readying themselves for the rebuild. And 2 years from now, who knows what a franchise quarterback coming into Denver could mean for this team in terms of, okay, now the Broncos are part of that group of contenders. So I think this could end up being a situation where we look down the line and say, hey, maybe Demaryius comes back in 2020. Maybe he comes back in 2021. Maybe he never comes back. I don't know. I don't think this is something that's beyond repair, though. I don't know. What do you think of that? Is this a situation that's beyond? Has the bridge been permanently burned, or is there a chance he could come back?
And I think that he understands the business reasons for this. To me, it's 85 to 90% next year's salary cap.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the fact that we can afford, it's a position that we're strong in. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as we grabbed Cortland, everyone knew that this was inevitably going to happen. So for me, I'm not even really upset about the 4th round pick. I know I was talking to my buddy yesterday, and he was saying anything less for than a third I would take it because of Demaryius's legacy with the Broncos and what he mean. But at the same time, you know, played out a different way. So he finishes the season here in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
We got to do something next offseason, or he's a 14 million cap hit. Is it more than that?
Yeah.
Something like
it's for the Broncos, it would have been over 17 million.
I thought it was 17 million for his salary cap, but then we saved 14 for
Correct.
So 17 million on the salary cap next year if he stays. And for a team that's needing to rebuild and especially outside of wide receiver, we're not really needing to build too much of wide receiver, especially, you know, if we retain Sanders, which I think is now looks a little bit more likely that Sanders is going to have a little bit longer potentially of a career at the Broncos. We'll see how that plays out as far as if I think that Cortland Sutton isn't enough. I think we're going to need to see some more out of Deshaun Hamilton before we can consider moving on beyond Sanders and maybe getting somebody else next year in the draft, something like that. But for me, you know, it's primarily salary cap reasons. So I think Demaryius understands that part of the business, understands that he's getting older and there's some young cats underneath him. He's become basically the wide receiver 2 on our team, behind Sanders. And I think that there's not really a lot of, I know there's a lot of smack talk that's been going on from a solid portion of the fan base. But I think a lot of people, especially now that we've kind of moved beyond him, are looking more positively at his career than negatively. So I think he is well loved in Denver is the point of that. I think he's well loved in Denver. I think people have been bummed that he's almost been like, it's easy to point the finger at him in recent years. You know, it's when some of these drops have happened, but I think it's really just a symptom of how frustrated Denver has been, that we're very hypercritical of every single mistake, more so than we probably should be, because we're just not liking the direction of where things are headed. And I think he got kind of the blunt end of that. But I think beyond that, we still are keeping Denver fans are keeping things in perspective, and we still have a lot more reasons to be positive about Demaryius than negative. He didn't end bad with the coaching staff. Coaching staff loves him. I'm sure he has a good relationship with John Elway. So it seems like a lot of reasons why, whether or not it's him coming back as a free agent or him returning and just living his life here in Denver, I think that there's not a lot of bad blood, I think, with the organization or with the fans. He hasn't really clashed with any other players or anything like that. You know, he's brought up Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton this year, which is cool that they got to spend half the season with him. That's another thing that's awesome. So yeah, I think he knows that this is primarily a salary cap reason. And I think that the drops and a bit of his play drop off factors in slightly to that, with the fact that we have 3 other guys, like we talked about in the pod months ago, maybe about a month or two. The early season is just, you know, going to him on third downs and as somebody that we're relying on in clutch moments. Maybe there's some other guys that we start kind of working into that role. And getting some more snaps to these young kids to see what we have in them. I think that's definitely a positive, but I think more than everything else, it was really just the money hit and the fact that that's a position of strength that we could afford to trim. Not, I don't want to say trim the fat on. I wouldn't call Demaryius, wouldn't call you fat, DT, but yeah, I think that was an area that we can devote some money and reposition it over, redistribute it to another part where we have a weakness. and take value from that part and put it somewhere else. So yeah, I think the chances are high that we see a return from DT at some point.
Yeah, I would love it. I would absolutely love it. This is really cool too. As we're sitting here recording this, the Broncos just released a statement that says the Broncos are looking forward to recognizing Demaryius at Sunday's game against the Texans. This includes modifying the signage into a thank you banner honoring Demaryius's many contributions to the Broncos and this community. So the Broncos are immediately going to be recognizing him for what he did for the team. I don't think this was a move made obvious. This isn't a fire sale, okay? This is the Broncos getting some value instead of cutting Thomas at the end of the season and wasting a year of his career essentially on a team that, unless they get white hot, I mean, they're probably not making the playoffs. Despite our best wishes prior to the season and what this thing looked like on paper, but this is just really cool of the Broncos to do, to set that up. To put up the signage outside of the stadium and really just honor a player who has meant a lot. I mean, you think about what the reason that they traded Brandon Marshall. I mean, I love Brandon Marshall more than a lot of people. I think he's one of the most underrated, potentially the best wide receiver in NFL history that people don't talk about enough is Brandon Marshall. But the guy was kind of a problem off the field for the Broncos, and he caused them some headaches. And as great of a player as he was, trading him was not the wrong choice at the time. And Demaryius Thomas kind of came in and set the example of exactly what this franchise wants their players to model on and off the field, of excellence and of just dedication and devotion to the cause, devotion to the team, and being a professional. And Thomas was always, he's always at the center of those community events. We see him in those pictures all the time. I see Demaryius Thomas in more Santa hats than any other Broncos player on the team. It seems like every single year he's delivering gifts to kids, or he's participating in those Play 60 events or whatever. Great in the community. So he deserves every bit of recognition that they're going to give him this year. And whenever he does go into the Ring of Fame, I mean, it's going to be well deserved. I mean,
something we talked about, I don't know if it was off season or early in the season, and this isn't like a prediction we nailed, because I think everybody knew that eventually it was very likely it was going to be Thomas's last year. But we talked about how it will be very interesting if Demaryius Thomas gets traded before this year, because he's second in at least the yardage record. I don't remember, but there was something we're talking about where he has to maybe it was touchdowns, I'm not sure. Something he's behind Rod Smith on at number 2, and just how it would be interesting if he doesn't have a big year with us. He'll be forever cemented as the second best statistical receiver behind Rod Smith, which is now the case. So that's really interesting that he was about a half season, like a season and a half to a half season, something like that, somewhere in that range, give or take, from being the number 1 Broncos receiver of all time in almost every category. And now he'll forever be the second best, as far as the statistics are concerned. And certain statistics, I'd have to pull those up. I don't remember what we talked about, but I do remember us saying that this is likely a possibility. And if that's the case, it's going to be interesting that he'll forever be just a notch down.
Man, that is crazy, isn't it?
It is. And what do you think the Broncos fans are thinking as far as like Rod Smith and DT of who the best Broncos wide receiver of all time is? Because that's a conversation now that it's going to be had for a long time. And this is now the cutoff. We've just cut off for what we factor into that. So this is the first day where we can really look at the body of Broncos work, conclusively, unless he comes back, obviously, which we talked about. And that's going to be an interesting thing to kind of compare and contrast, as those two as number 1 and number 2 for a long time.
Gosh, that's a great question. When you look at, okay, so I just pulled up the all-time stats here. So here's where we're at. In actually quite a significant number of games less than Rod Smith. So Demaryius Thomas was competing with Shannon Sharpe and Rod Smith for all these all-time records, right? So Rod Smith is number 1 in receptions, He's number 1 in yards. He's number 1 in touchdowns.
Mhm.
So Demaryius is nearly 200 off receptions, but he played in nearly 60 fewer games
Right.
for the Broncos. So I mean, that's a lot, but he's only 2,000 off the all-time yardage record, which probably would have probably been pretty tight.
Yeah.
But he's 8 touchdowns away from the all-time.
Yeah.
That was the close. That's the close one. He was really close to Shannon Sharp. 10 catches away, in fact, for number 2 all-time on the Broncos receptions list. So he missed that by 10 catches. But man, I don't know. Do you say is it? I don't know. Is it over the top to say he's the best wide receiver in Broncos history?
I would say he is on a per game basis. I think you'd have to obviously say like a certain amount of games. But it'd be interesting, actually. One thing we should compare and look at, speaking of a player you mentioned earlier, is I'm very interested to look at what those stats are, like we're doing for Demaryius versus Rod Smith right now. I'd like to see what that looks like for Brandon Marshall versus DT as far as
per game.
As far as the limited sample size that we had. Because that, to me, those are my top 3. I think most Broncos fans would agree with at least Demaryius and Rod Smith, and to those that aren't bitter with Brandon Marshall, probably would put him somewhere, maybe more so our generation. There's probably some older wide receivers. I guess Ed McCaffrey for a lot of people as well. But my top 3 are definitely Demaryius, B. Marsh, and Rod Smith. But that's interesting. I don't know how I'd rank those 3, even personally.
So here's Brandon Marshall, 25 touchdowns in 61 games. So a little less than, let's call that what, 45%. I don't know. I'm not good at doing math off the top of my head like that. Demaryius, roughly 50% touchdown per game rate. So 60 touchdowns in 125 games.
Okay.
So basically 1 out of every 2 games, Demaryius was getting a TD, and roughly 1 out of every 3 games, or 2 out of every 5 games, Marshall was getting a TD, something like that. So it was pretty close in that regard. Yards per game, we got Brandon Marshall at 65.9, Demaryius at 72.4. Yards per reception, Brandon Marshall at 12.3, Demaryius at 13.6. Roughly the same catch percentage, 60.7, 60.3. Marshall was at 327 catches in 61 games. Thomas is at 665 in 125.
Yeah.
So they're, fairly similar production wise.
DT still has the edge in that one too. I think on a per game basis, Demaryius Thomas has been the best, and I think a lot of that you do have to. I wouldn't say it all put an asterisk by it, but you do have to factor in that out of those 3 that we're talking about, only one of them had a role to play in Peyton Manning Broncos offense that was everybody. There was 4 players with 10 touchdowns that one year. I think that definitely helps for sure. Cutler was gunning it to Marshall those years, but he was still a young Jay Cutler and not in his prime Peyton Manning. So that definitely helps.
But, so this is really interesting now that we've brought this up. This is a player who's creeping up on this list, and you'll know immediately who it is. But Emmanuel Sanders is really creeping up this list rather quickly. 71.4 yards per game, and this is his 5th year with the Broncos now. So he's now been with the Broncos longer than Brandon Marshall, longer than, let's see, who else was on? Longer than Eric Decker.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think about.
That's very interesting, man. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah. Longer than any of those guys. He's been on the team. He's at 71.4 yards per game, which ranks 4th in team history behind Brandon Lloyd, who was with the team for 3 seasons. He's number 1 at 84 yards per game. And then Demaryius Thomas at 72.4. He's number 2 all time. And then Lionel Taylor from the 60s at 71.6. So Sanders is creeping up the list right there. Yards per reception. Now this is pretty nuts. So let's look at the among the players that are that should be on that list, I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is at 13.6, and you got that's the same as Demaryius Thomas. That's more than Lionel Taylor, who's on that list. That's more than B. Marsh. That's more than Rod Smith. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's more than Ed McCaffrey from 1995 to 2003. So Emmanuel Sanders, although the trade of Demaryius Thomas really stings, and we're also looking at a similar touchdown rate per game for Sanders compared to Marshall at 25 touchdowns in 67 games, where Marshall was 25 and 61. So it's fairly close. But that's interesting to me that Emmanuel Sanders now has a chance to kind of establish himself the rest of this year and then all of next year. And I don't remember what his contract is beyond that, but he's got a chance to really establish himself now as arguably one of, maybe ultimately, depending on how long he plays, one of the best receivers in franchise history. I mean, that seems weird to say.
Yeah. Very weird. And I guess now it's kind of like one of those moments where you have to kind of stop and look around you and evaluate what's going on and where you're at. This is definitely a bit of a jarring day that's kind of forced us maybe into this position to take inventory, so to speak, as far as where we're at. And these are some very interesting statistics we're looking at. We're looking now at the body of Demaryius Thomas conclusively, and we're making the realization that this is now the Emmanuel Sanders led wide receiver corps, and also a huge promotion for Courtland Sutton. So what are your thoughts now on what the Broncos receiving core looks like? We've been talking to Emmanuel. We could talk a little bit more Emmanuel for Courtland Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick. What are you thinking about the Broncos wide receiver corps going forward?
I'm really excited about it. I think that the Broncos receiving group going forward, this is something that I was pushing for earlier in the season with, Demaryius Thomas was kind of struggling with drops in the early goings of the year. And I was kind of calling for, I don't know if you remember this, maybe we touched on this in a previous podcast, or I can't remember if I just wrote about it on Predominantly Orange, but I was calling for Deshaun Hamilton to get additional snaps at the expense of Thomas, essentially.
Yeah, we were talking about it.
Yeah, and it made sense to me at the time because Thomas, he's kind of been their mentor leader. He's kind of been that veteran, that veteran presence, but he wasn't producing. I mean, this is another jarring statistic for you. I don't know how many people realize this. 2 games in the past 2 years, so 1.5 seasons exactly. In 2 games, Demaryius Thomas topped 100 yards receiving. And they were both in the past 2 years. Right. Yep. So it was the week 5 loss against the Giants last year. And ironically, it was the week 5 loss against the Jets this year in which he topped 100 yards.
New York.
So the production hasn't been there as far as yardage and making those big. I mean, he's made some touch catches.
He was making, and that we were set to pay him.
Yeah. We
are not seeing the production of that. Now, of course, we got to factor our quarterback situation the past couple of years. Definitely affects that. But I think the national media, and I think just general fantasy football pundits and fans, I think they're quick to forget those things as far as the fact that he's been, I was talking to my buddy earlier about this, he's been a bit more of a liability than a strength in the clutch. He's definitely still come out with some clutch catches in the past couple years, but it seems like more often than he comes down with those, there's just been drops in situations that have just really popped the balloon, man. Just deflated the momentum. There's been just too many of those moments for I think for how much money he's making it. And if you've never seen Demaryius in elite Demaryius mode, then it probably doesn't matter as much. But it's like we've been wanting him to have this return to form where he's one of the top 10, top 5 at some points receiver in the NFL. And it's just he seems like he's been far away from that. So hopefully maybe with a better quarterback, maybe he finds and recaptures that resurgence on the Texans. But as far as for us, it just hasn't matched what we're paying him. And in those situations, we talked a lot about the third down thing about especially when Jake Butt was around, is like, we have Jake Butt, we have Deshaun Hamilton. Isn't there some of these other guys that we thought would be those third down pacifiers that we go to more often than we have? And so we discussed, I think there was a couple pretty big third down drops or misses or something that Demaryius was involved in early in the season in the first few weeks, that we were like, all right, let's start getting the ball to Deshaun and to maybe to Jake Butt at the time. I don't remember the timeline, but there were some other guys that we needed to get worked in more. And I definitely thought by this time in the season, we would have seen a lot more of Deshaun Hamilton, even with Demaryius and all the wide receivers that we have. I thought we would have seen more Deshaun Hamilton. So I'm excited to see him now be able to carve a role where we've got Sutton and Emmanuel on the outside and getting Deshaun involved in the slot and maybe putting him in that position that we expected he would have been more in.
Yeah, and ironically, Hamilton was acquired with a 4th-round pick. So we're talking about replacing Demaryius Thomas's snaps with, a couple of guys who, and including one guy who was taken in the round in which a lot of fans are up in arms over us, settling for that low of a pick. And so you can make strong picks in the 4th round. Josie Jewell and Deshaun Hamilton this year in the 4th round. That's pretty good.
If you're an NFL GM, would you have given up a 3rd-round pick for Demaryius at this point in his career?
Oh, absolutely. Especially if I knew I was going to be picking low in the rounds. Absolutely. I would have done that. I wouldn't even have required the Broncos to swap picks late in the draft. I mean,
even with the salary cap next year, you'd and I don't know, man. I don't know if I would have done that. If I'm a 4th-round pick is fine.
So let me pull this up because I think the Houston Texans have some of the most cap space of any team in the league right now and going into next year. So right now they're at $16.5 million, which is the 6th overall highest in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And then next year, since they still have Deshaun Watson on that rookie contract, they have $67 million in cap space going into next season already without making any moves. Any cuts or anything like that. I don't know who they're all going to be trying to re-sign, but 67 mil going into next year. You add another 10 million onto that with, the assumed whatever that is, the increase, the 10 million roughly increase that happens every year in the salary cap.
I guess if you're a team that has a good quarterback on a rookie contract, it's definitely a lot more feasible to add him for a 3rd.
Exactly. That makes it much more easily digestible. And so for the Texans, that's a move that they could afford, literally. And it's something that they really needed in terms of they lost Will Fuller for the season, like we talked about at the start. You got to get DeAndre Hopkins more opportunities in that offense. And really
maybe take some eyeballs off him with putting DT on the other side of the field.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. And so, yeah, you're eating that big number. It is just for one season. And also, the Texans didn't pay Demaryius Thomas any prorated bonuses. And so they could technically get out of that contract with no dead money. So if they like what they see this offseason, we can afford that next year. Or if they don't like it, they only gave up a 4th-round pick to get him and try to win a championship. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to in the NFL. So there's a championship swinging move for the Texans, who haven't lost since week 3.
In a very weak division, so they got a better. I think they have a better chance at playoffs and at the very least making the playoffs. Simply, really, mostly because of their division. I know Deshaun's good, and they got some really good pieces on defense, but they don't seem like a team that's a Super Bowl contender. I feel like they still have some moves that they need to make. That's where it'd be interesting to see what they do with their salary cap, because this is a piece forward. But if you're talking the Texans going in and plunging all the way through the AFC, I mean, they got annihilated by the Patriots early this season. And I don't know if Demaryius Thomas is, I think he's a red zone upgrade for them. I don't know if he's going to have the impact on the Texans offense that Will Fuller had. He was getting I think a touchdown every single game with Deshaun Watson. and he was a deep threat. I don't think he's got that speed. DT's got the speed that Fuller had, so I think it'll be interesting to see them use him as a really good red zone weapon. But I don't know if he does better than Fuller was doing.
Yeah, fair
and with
point.
Fuller, they got smoked by the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they're going to have to devote. Hopefully, they do have a lot of salary cap space, because if they're in this kind of championship window while they have their rookie quarterback and a built up defense. Not rookie quarterback, but you know what I mean? A quarterback on a rookie contract. I think they got some more things they need to do with that salary cap to contend next year for a deep playoff run. This year, it's looking like they're just going to make the playoffs because there's no competition in their division.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the Texans got to strike while they can in that regard. I mean, you get a down year from the Jaguars, you get Andrew Luck surrounded by a bunch of bums on a weekly basis. I mean, and the Titans they're kind of just the Titans, you know. They kind of seem stuck in the mire of mediocrity, the muck of mediocrity. That's kind of
they're
what
not bad, but they're not good.
Right. Exactly. I think that, and this is a move that can push a team over the top mentally when your general manager makes a trade for a player as high profile as Demaryius Thomas.
Yeah.
And this just came in as we're talking about him. Seahawks released wide receiver Brandon Marshall. Crazy.
There it is.
Wow. In the same day Demaryius is traded.
Yeah.
Brandon Marshall released by another team. Man. Wow. This is just a wild day. It's a crazy day. It is.
And we did talk about before the show, but we should remind Broncos fans that Tim Tebow and Demaryius Thomas had very similar trades.
Mm-hmm.
Demaryius was a 4th and a 7th, and Tebow was a 4th and a 6th. So both of those first round picks came into the same year and had that epic overtime touchdown together. Both gone for similar prices.
Worth the first round picks in your opinion?
Absolutely. I think that the memories and that period of time, that stretch being, I mean, what I look at it as time value, and like whether it was like I leave some of these Bronco games kind of demoralized. Like, why didn't I play video games or just watch a TV show? Like something else would have, I felt, been more profitable with my time. Some of these games, though I love the Broncos and I still watch all their losses, but sometimes I do look at it and I'm like, man, what did I just devote my energy and my time to? Like I'm here on this floating rock in space for only a limited period of time. And I just devoted like 2 hours, 3 hours of my day to watching a demoralizing loss that just depressed me, you know? So it's like the energy and the memories and the overall value per game, like enjoyability and excitement. I don't know how you'd quantify that. Man, were those some of the games that I walked away with the most opposite reaction, as far as would I have ever in any of those Tebow games been like, man, that was a waste of time? Like, never. Even on the games where he didn't do great, it was still super fun to watch. So I think that what I got back in return personally as a fan was every bit storybook, and that to me is what I want to watch the game for. 31 teams every year don't get the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So we got to quantify it differently. Yes, of course, championships are all that matters. There's that whole thing, absolutely. I think that's the target you have to always be shooting for. There's something about that. But, are 31 out of 32 teams every single year just going to gloss over the season and be like, oh, that was a failure because we didn't win the Super Bowl? Are there other ways that we can gauge and value whether or not we spent our time well and whether there was something to enjoy and appreciate? So I think finding that in, things like Tebow and that's to me is those epic moments, those epic storybook come from behind against all odds, were just like you felt like you were watching a movie as much as you felt like you were watching a football game. So yeah, absolutely. And then Demaryius, of course, we got our value with Demaryius. I mean, even in the Super Bowl loss, he broke the Super Bowl record for most catches in a Super Bowl. It was kind of like it's a forgotten silver lining of that freaking dang Seahawks game. But, then he gets a Super Bowl, helps us get a Super Bowl ring, and has just so many great seasons. And me personally, I had Demaryius Thomas up until earlier in this off season. I traded him away in our dynasty league.
To me.
I traded him to you. Demaryius rode me to a couple championships, man. I drafted him his rookie year. So I had him for season after season. And of course, the past 3 haven't been great, but my team as a whole hasn't been great. So in some of my better years, Demaryius was a staple of that. So I would say emphatically that those were great picks, legacy picks for the Broncos. 2 people that have cemented themselves in Broncos history. Tebow's obviously shorter, but now Demaryius is potentially the best, arguably the receiver of Broncos history. So yes, absolutely.
I hope at Demaryius Thomas's Ring of Fame ceremony, I hope that they bring Tim Tebow back and let him throw a little slant route.
They should. That would be
amazing,
man. They really should.
That would be incredible. That would be amazing to see. Well, I think that you and I both agree. Demaryius Thomas, regardless of statistics, one of the best Broncos ever.
Yeah.
Regardless of position, certainly in the conversation with Rod Smith as the best wide receiver in team history. But I would say one of the best players to ever put on the orange and blue.
Yeah. At any position, man.
Yep. He'll be synonymous with 88. That's his number permanently. He was a fixture for the team. He was part of the best offense in NFL history.
Yep.
I mean, what else could he have wanted to accomplish? He won the Super Bowl. He made all pro teams. He made the Pro Bowl.
Yep.
He was among the NFL's leaders in touchdown catches. I don't remember if in 2014, I know he had 14 TDs, but I don't remember if that was the number 1 total in the league. But I mean, what has he not accomplished at the position? And so hats off to an incredible Broncos career. My goodness, Demaryius Thomas, just a Broncos legend, no matter what.
Absolutely. And I think that right there really quantifies it as far as what, matters the most today in reflection, is that Demaryius has been a legend for us. He has hit all of those accolades. He's been a part of a lot of special moments. He's been a part of more special moments than we even understand, as far as like you're talking about a lot of his community service. And you just always saw him with fans, and just that freaking DT smile, man. Like it's the easiest thing to picture in my head. Is just that kind of like quasi goofy little side grin. Like He's showing, like I can just see it, man. He's always been a good, positive dude. Who just has seemed like you always kind of knew who he was. You always knew who DT was. He was transparent, and he was happy, and yet at the same time you could see it. You could see it in his eyes when his mom's about to get released from prison, and just the things that are going on. You just always knew who DT was. He wasn't a double-sided person by any way. He seemed like he was just like a good, simple, football-loving, awesome teammate, awesome friend, awesome guy, and that's where I'm gonna choose. I think, we could probably switch and talk, some of the reasons why this happened, but at the same time, like that's the Demaryius that is gonna stick with me. Is was, and you can always look at kind of the end of your time period with the team, or the end of a player's career, and there's always an inevitable drop off. I'm bummed about Brandon Marshall right now. He's been riding my bench all season. I wanted a last final strong year where he's at least catching touchdowns on the Seahawks, and they're not even throwing to him anymore. But you can't look at this season and go, oh, Brandon Marshall's a bum. Like
Yep.
you gotta look at the body of work and the good times and kind of, quantify that in that way. So it's like, yes, there's reasons why this happened. Yes, there's reasons why I believe in pretty much every way this was the right move for the Broncos and for Demaryius. And you can simultaneously know that and know that he's 30 years old and he's a wide receiver. He's going to start slowing down, and there's a lot of that's going to happen. But yet that he was a major piece for our franchise over the last decade and has just earned a special place forever in the eternity of hearts and souls of Broncos fans in the history books of Broncos, all-time greats.
Well said. Well said. Number 80 will always be Rod Smith. Number 84 will always be Shannon Sharp. Number 87, that'll always be Ed McCaffrey. 88, that's always Demaryius Thomas.
That's what I won't want to see for a while on anyone else.
Yep. That ought to get the Champ Bailey treatment. And speaking of that, Pac-Man Jones not doing a great job of living up to that 24. So let's get that redacted.
At least Lindsey's living up to 30.
I will say, man, that not only does that look good, I think that's the spirit of 30 is invading Lindsey.
Oh, yeah. He's embodied it fully, and I feel like this is almost, I don't want to be sacrilegious or blasphemous here, but it feels a bit like he's adding something to the 30. You know what I mean? It's like he's encompassing. I'm not saying he's everything TD was and more, but I'm just saying as far as the essence of that 30, there's some grit that Lynn bring into it to where, like, by the end of his career, I still think first and foremost, best 30 will still be TD, but it'll almost be this, like, I don't know, man, this weird symbiotic infusion of like the greatness of TD and yet like the grit and feistiness of Philip Lindsay.
I agree. I've been loving it. I mean, even as the Broncos are losing games, Lindsay has been a treat to watch.
That's almost the difference between the last year's kind of demoralizing losses and stretch is that I'm looking at it like, well, at least we have Philip Lindsay and Cortland Sutton to look forward to.
Yep.
Josie Jewell, like seeing those things working well, seeing that some of this draft class was such a strong hit and that we have pieces for the future. It's easy to stay optimistic despite what's going on.
I agree. And I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving that part of it. I think when you're losing, like we talked about, however many weeks ago now, we talked about the fact that if you want to shift your perspective, because let's be honest, like what you just said, spending 3 hours watching a football game, if you're not gonna have any fun doing it, or if all it's doing is making you angry or depressed, or find a new way to watch the game so that it can add to your day. I'm excited to watch Cortland Sutton. I'm excited to watch Philip Lindsay. I've been listening to these podcasts from this guy named Brian Buffini. He's great. It's just phenomenal stuff. We had this one about like the power of positive thinking or the power of the mind or something like that, and just talked about how much like 78% of the things that we take in every single day are negative.
Yeah. And
so why would we add more to that plate of negativity by just, being upset by everything that we're watching? This is upsetting. I don't want to see Vance Joseph on the sideline. I'm not excited about our rookie class. You got a lot of people dogging on John Elway for making this trade when this is really just a part of the circle of life in the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't hold on to these guys for dear life. And the same people who are criticizing Elway for trading DT are the same people who have been criticizing him for re-signing all the wrong players and saying that that he's been clinging to this non-existent championship window for too long. It doesn't make any sense to me.
There were 4 teams bidding for DT. Okay. So this is obviously, we probably chose the best one of that bundle, one can assume. Obviously, we don't know the offers for the other trades, right? But what did they want? Hold on to DT and then, either swallow that money or cut him next year. And what did you get for him? We didn't make the playoffs. Yep. You got 1 more extra year with him or 2 more extra years with him. and that maybe at the detriment and the cost of being able to build elsewhere in the team, or maybe even sign a young free agent wide receiver that's like 26 or something, 27, that we'll be able to use for, a lot more, at least, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
we cashed out, and we cashed out at a point where we're rebuilding. We're not going to, we didn't trade DT in the off season because we wanted to see if we had it enough to carry him to another playoffs. And it didn't happen. We're here looking like we're probably not going to make the playoffs this year. And that's a bummer, because here on the Knights Den, y'all know we're the most optimistic, positive. We're going freaking 19-0, 18-0 every year. And it's like, 19-0 every year. But it's like, we have to temper our expectations now and be somewhat realistic. We can still hope that we finish the season, and win every single game. We can hope for it, but at the same time, it's this is the best franchise move for the future. We need to not just look at the microscopic at this moment. We need to look wide at the team, and we took probably the most that we were going to get from these teams. We cleared a lot of money for next year and acquired a pick that we can get another guy in the Deshaun Hamilton range to move forward with this franchise. And not only that, we're not hurting at wide receiver. We've got a really solid group, a really good trifecta. Let's see if Deshaun Hamilton can start making his Broncos identity known. Now, Tim Patrick with this coming off his first touchdown as well. We've got a solid stable of guys. So what do you want? If they're mad at Elway for only getting a fourth, are you mad that he couldn't negotiate very well and get more? Because that's not really how it works. He had 4 different teams. They were probably pitting all 4 of them against each other and trying to raise the value as high as they could. So this is, to me, what more could we ask for from John Elway with Demaryius? Hold on to him and get nothing? Negotiate better and get more? Like a 4th round pick for a guy that's 30 years old and has been more infamous for drops than catches over the past 2-3 years. I feel like that's a win for us.
Yep.
Yes,
I agree.
The hearts of Bronco fans, but this is a mental, business decision as well, where you have to look out for but you got to separate your heart from it, and you got to make the best move and decision for the team. And this was the best thing for the future of the team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And you got Jordan Taylor about to come back from that hip injury, that surgery that he had this offseason, and so big play sunshine. That could be interesting. And
Carlos Henderson, let's go and get Carlos.
Bring Carlos back. I don't think there's any bigger advocates of Carlos Henderson, probably including his own agent, than you and I.
Dude, put me on the phone, man. I will pitch Carlos Henderson like I'm pitching a freaking TV show script.
Yep. And interestingly enough, in regards to that, I know it's not happening probably, but Vance Joseph did talk about yesterday how average the return game has been. And so just swallow your pride and bring the guy back. Put him back there on kick return, see what happens.
Yep.
But
I'm ready.
I think the Broncos have plenty of depth at wide receiver right now. You've got obviously Emmanuel Sanders, who's arguably the best player on the team. You've got Cortland Sutton coming up, Deshaun Hamilton. You've got Tim Patrick, who scored his first touchdown of the season. And another interesting fact here. So on the same weekend that Tim Patrick scored his first NFL touchdown, Cortland Sutton set a career high for receiving yards. And I think it was only 78 or something like that. But in that same game, you got those 2 guys who are going to be expected to fill some big shoes before you trade Demaryius Thomas. And so the Broncos maybe needed to see a little bit of proof. They got it. And here we are today talking about Demaryius Thomas as a member of the Houston Texans. And so it's definitely bittersweet, because I want to see those young guys succeed, and they need an opportunity in order to succeed. And so you can't have both worlds here. You can't have the situation where the young players play, which was the big complaint last year. I remember, a lot of fans were upset that the young players weren't playing. That whole 2017 rookie class made virtually no impact last year, and everybody was up in arms over it all off season, complaining about how Vance Joseph didn't do the right thing by, keeping those rookies on the bench and moving DeMarcus Walker's positions and this and that and the other, and not getting Paxton Lynch out onto the field. And now this year, they're trying actively to get these rookies out on the field, and people are complaining about trading away a veteran player who had some value, who was going to get cut after the season. Like, you got to, like you said, stop looking at it from the microscope perspective, start looking at it from the big picture perspective. Everybody knows, including the Broncos apparently, that, and this is the biggest thing I think for today. The biggest thing from this trade is this is the first real sign I think that we've seen from the Denver Broncos that they are going to rebuild.
Yep. And that's what we need to do. And this whole reloading thing, I do feel like we're in a better position than a lot of teams are when they're rebuilding. I think so. We're somewhere in between rebuild and reload, but we're not in full just reload mode. And I don't think dude, look at who's besides that Packers game, right? Eliminate the Packers game for a moment last week against the Rams. Who has been the best team against the Chiefs and the Rams this year?
Yep. That would be us.
Broncos, man. We almost beat the two best teams in each conference.
Yep.
We have something, man. We're close, but we're not there.
And not quite.
Sad to admit that here on the optimistic, super positive Knights of Den podcast.
I feel okay about it though, because I think that acknowledging that we're not in a position where we have to believe something that isn't true at this point. Like the Broncos need a franchise quarterback. Yeah. I was riding high on the optimism for Case Keenum based on what he did in Minnesota, and I think rightly so. I would say that was warranted based on what he did last year and the fact that we had Musgrave as the offensive coordinator and all these different weapons. Like, there was no reason to assume after what Keenum did last year that he was going to regress to the point of throwing an interception per game again this season, which he had. And even more so than that, he's been turning it over at a higher clip than once per game. So that's disturbing to me. And Keenum is really, at the same time as he's kind of elevated the offense from what it was with Simeon, he's also been holding it back from finishing and closing out close games. Yeah, like the Chiefs game specifically, and then the Rams game, I felt like they left some opportunities on the table there. And then this most recent game against Kansas City, I was doing an article earlier this week. This was really interesting to me. So there was this big swing in the game. In the early part of the fourth quarter, the Broncos went forward on fourth down and threw the touchdown pass to Jeff Hireman. So they went for two right there and didn't get it. And then they ended up stopping the Chiefs, I think, on their next two possessions, an interception from Justin Simmons, and the Broncos got the ball back, did nothing with it. And then actually that was when Case Keenum turned it over. Yeah, he fumbled, and then they stopped the Chiefs again. I think they got a 3-and-out after that, and then they came back, and then Case Keenum fumbled after that big near 30-yard run by Devontae Booker. And so on two possessions there where you're within 10 points of, let's say, the best team in the AFC right now, you're within two possessions of that game. You failed on the 2-point conversion, which would have put you down 8. And then you come back, you throw an interception on the flea flicker, the stupid flea flicker play. Has that worked yet for the Broncos this year? Or they thrown multiple interceptions on the flea flicker? Doesn't seem to be fooling anybody, but so the flea flicker interception.
Like Lindsey had a huge hole in the middle on that play too.
Yeah, he should have just run.
Like, oh no, screw this flea flicker. I'm just gonna take it.
Yeah. Yeah, they should have just ran with it. But instead, those two moments where your defense stepped up big, got the turnover, got the 3-and-out, it's disappointing to see that the quarterback is the reason why those opportunities were left on the field instead of taken advantage of. And that's on Case Keenum. That's Case Keenum's issue right now. He can't. He's making. I don't think he's making more mistakes than a lot of normal quarterbacks. I mean, he probably is making more on average per week, but the issue is right now is that he's making mistakes at the worst possible time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
So,
and in a non-related rewind, I forgot about the fact that Patriots beat the Chiefs, but
that is true.
So eliminate the one Packer game and the one Patriot game, and
yeah,
or if you do that, we are the best team against those two teams so far.
That's true. That's true.
We hung with the Chiefs twice, man. I mean, that first one we really should have beaten them, and then the second one we at least kept it within a score in Kansas City. So
they played him tough. I give some credit there to Vance Joseph. I know that a lot of people are ready. We're already talking about potential coaching changes after the season. I don't know. I feel like they did it. That the coaching staff did a pretty good job against those two teams that you mentioned.
Yeah. So I can just feel the triggering of everyone listening.
Right
Blood boils at the thought of you giving any positive light to Vance Joseph. But yeah. Oh, he's next to go, man. He's next to go. I mean, yes, you can give credit where credit's due. I think his job would have been saved if we had better quarterback play out of Keenum. I think there's a couple games so far, at least a couple games that we would have won with just slightly elevated quarterback play, talking about hitting Demaryius on the sidelines on that one come from behind drive. Some of that I think would have been enough of a difference that it would have changed the conversation on Vance Joseph right now. But ultimately it's looking like, he's probably done as soon as the Broncos are realistically eliminated from playoff contention. As far as if we lose, 3 more games of the next 5, we're probably like out of the space to where we're going to be able to contend for a playoff spot. And I think as soon as that happens, where it becomes mathematically either impossible or highly improbable that we're not going to make the playoffs, I think that he's that next coaching casualty.
Yep, I think so too. I think we're definitely going to be moving on and going into a new era. So that, I mean, any sort of falling short of the playoffs this year, I think was going to do Joseph in. That's just the reality of the situation and what the Broncos expect out of their coaches. I mean, they fired John Fox after 4 straight division titles and a Super Bowl loss. And then it felt to me before Gary Kubiak had to resign due to health issues. I mean, it felt like to me like Gary Kubiak might have been getting close to.
Yeah.
And I don't think, in retrospect, hearing John Elway's comments after, I don't think he would have fired him. But
yeah, but it was very smooth of a transition as far as, probably outside of the personal friendship connection to him. If that was just a coach for the same criteria he fired John Fox, he probably would have fired Kubiak. And to be able to, I don't want to say use the health excuse, because I think it was a very legitimate thing that was going on. But I think that saved it being a more dramatic situation, a negative, Kubiak getting fired, or even him having to face a lot of heat and questions about that. And then not only that, it's different if you fire a coach versus him stepping down for health reasons, to where he was able to step back up and rejoin the organization. Who knows if that would have happened if he would have had to fire Kubiak?
Yeah. We may never know. We will never know. But that was an interesting situation.
Yeah.
And you're right. Smooth is the right word. I mean, never want to see anybody have to resign or retire due to health issues. But at that point in time, the expectations were still to win a Super Bowl, and to miss out on the playoffs that year, kind of collapsing. I think the Broncos were 7-2 that year, or 7-3, even with Simeon as the starter. And then they kind of just dipped as the season progressed. And so I don't know, there were a lot of fans that maybe didn't say it out loud, but really probably at their deepest, in the deepest part of their heart, wanted him to be fired, Kubiak, and to go to somebody else, because winning is the expectation in Denver. And certainly the rebuilding process wasn't part of anyone's plans or hopes or anything like that. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. There's never any shortage of news surrounding the Denver Broncos ever. And so this offseason, we're going to probably be getting a new head coach. We'll see what happens to Case Keenum. We'll see what happens at the quarterback position. I don't know.
This is identity crisis time. That's the bigger thing. I think more so than, we don't have the right players perchance outside of, I think we need a franchise quarterback. I think that this is more of an identity issue. I think the Broncos don't have an identity right now. And I think that they actually have a lot of promising talent on both sides of the field. Definitely some gaping holes on both, but I think that there's some serious pieces. We're in a better position than a lot of these other franchises as far as where they're at. I mean, we've got a killer freaking pass rush potential. We've got at least a top 5 lockdown starting cornerback. We've got Josie Jewell in the middle that's looking like he's going to be just a clutch middle linebacker for us for years to come. We've got some good young wide receiver weapons. We have probably the best duo of young running backs in the league. A couple pieces on the offensive line that are solid. So I think that there's some serious pieces to play with, but at the same time, I think it's maybe not so much a rebuilding of all the personnel as much as we need a rebuilding of the identity. And where does that come from? Primarily coach and quarterback.
Yep.
That's where your headship is. The leader of the team is the coach and the leader of the players is the quarterback. And right now it seems like both of those things are not where they need to be tuned into freaking Denver Broncos frequency as far as what the fans expect, as far as what this team is supposed to be. It's not coming through from those two leadership positions.
Yeah, and I think addressing both of them could certainly dull some of the talk about the ownership situation. If you've got your quarterback and coach figured out, all the rest of that stuff seems to kind of just be business as usual. But right now, the Broncos feel like a hot mess because you got no clarity with your head coach. Your franchise quarterback is not on the roster right now, and the ownership situation is, it's questionable.
For you.
So
if you were a young stud college coach, offensive, creative, all this stuff, who would you rather go take over? Honestly, Baker Mayfield's Browns or the Broncos situation?
If I was leaving college for the NFL, I might be more inclined to go to the situation that involved a place that already has the quarterback in place.
Right.
So I would probably say the Browns.
I agree.
Not to say that a year from now, if the Broncos are able to somehow get a guy like, let's say they get Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
So a year from now, if the Broncos have Herbert, and we're talking about Herbert plus that 2018 draft class, I think the core the Broncos have outside of QB is better than a lot of teams that are going to be rebuilding. But
the weight is so much more leans toward needing that franchise guy.
Gotta have it.
I'd rather start with Baker and build around him than start with the Broncos situation and potentially be stalled out because you don't have a quarterback for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Hey, and it'd be awesome to get Herbert, but the silver lining to me of not getting him is the fact that it's just the least sexy quarterback name.
Yeah.
Herbert. Like, I would not be looking forward to I can't wait to watch Herbert this weekend.
No, that's a good point.
Sorry. That's not.
Yeah,
that's the reason, but that's going to be my silver lining if we don't.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this will be a discussion. We'll have a whole podcast on this, I'm sure, but looking forward to that quarterback situation getting resolved, I don't think personally, if the Broncos are really committed to this process, I don't think 2019 is the deadline to get a QB because of how good the players are that are coming out in 2020 and beyond.
Yeah.
And so you can't back yourself into a corner and say that it's Herbert or bust, or that it's, any other QB that might come out this year or bust, because those guys are not even there. I mean, compared to Tua from Alabama right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't bank your chances on getting him either, but would you rather think like the Broncos did in 2016, like they had their QB of the future and pass on Mahomes and Watson and all these other guys? I mean, that's how you have to look at it. You drafted your guy in the first round in 2016, so obviously you weren't gonna take someone in the first round in 2017 again.
Yeah,
it's just a. And then they passed on arguably the MVP of the NFL.
Yeah.
And they could have easily traded, a first and a third round pick just like anybody else in the 2017 draft and moved up. And they wouldn't even have had to move up as far as Kansas City because they didn't make the playoffs that year. And so just all those different things factor in. And so you just can't look at 1 year as a window and say, okay, we have to get a QB in 2019 because otherwise we're not going to be competitive. Well, you're committed $21 million to Case Keenum next year, and you can only save roughly $1 million if you cut him because there's $10 million in dead cap. And so actually it's 11 million off the cap, and then it's 10 million in dead cap. So I don't know if that's a net or if that's just I don't know how that works exactly. But anyway, 2019 to me, not the deadline. And so I don't know. We'll see what happens. If they do end up going for a quarterback this year, it could be Herbert. I don't know who else it would be because nobody else stands out to me as like a can't miss franchise guy.
Yeah.
So
I think you got it, and we'll see what happens as far as who's available, where we're at, and Keenum still got a back half of the season. I'm interested to see. I'm still always open to him winning us over. I'm still, I don't think he's going to do it. I don't have expectation that he's going to. I haven't seen enough to think that that's the way it's going to trend, but who knows if it just clicks, and that happens, who knows? It still could. There's still viable chance that may, we may have a better back half. So who knows? I wish that would be the case, and then we can definitely go through next year's draft and can try to go to 2020 for getting our quarterback. It'll be interesting. I think most importantly, we need to figure out this coaching situation in the immediate future. That's going to be first priority. I wouldn't say it's more important than figuring out the quarterback, but it seems like something that we can solve sooner.
Yeah. Yep.
You don't have to draft a coach,
Right? You can pick
always negotiations are going to come into play. You more so than having to negotiate for trade and draft picks to jump up and get a guy earlier on. He can. It looks like there's going to be about 3 or 4 good coaching candidates this year, so we have to make ourselves look appealing, and maybe Lindsey, Freeman, Sutton, Sanders, and what's left of our defense. Maybe that's enough of a pull for a coach to come in and be like, you know what, we'll figure this quarterback situation out and find a way to frickin' unleash these pieces in a better way, in a more creative way. Maybe, I don't know what the deal is. It's going to be interesting, but we need an identity shift. We need an identity shift. I don't like it.
Yep. There's a lot more questions than answers right now, but that's why we're here. That's why we're here for you. We're here to talk it out on the Knights of Den podcast. And so as we kind of close out, this has been a bit of a longer episode here, but we're thankful for you sticking with us through it. as we've been sitting here, no other Broncos trades have been made at this point. There's still about 30 minutes to the deadline. And so I read a report that said they weren't likely. John Elway actually was one who said that they were probably not going to be making any more trades. And so I think what we've got here is a situation where we're moving forward with a youth movement, come what may, as far as winning or losing. But the Broncos are right now in position for a top 10 draft pick. If the season ended today, they would in fact be at number 10 overall. And so we'll have a lot to discuss between the ownership, just the leadership in general, like you said, quarterback and head coach, but the ownership of the team. What's the name of the team's stadium going to be? I mean, there's going to be a lot to talk about for the Denver Broncos over the course of the next, 6 to 8 months, and then some. So we're thankful for you sticking with us. If you like what you hear from us, please like and subscribe on YouTube, on our Instagram page. Go and like that and follow that. Follow us on Twitter at Knights of Den. Follow us on iTunes or SoundCloud or wherever you listen to podcasts. We want to engage with you. We want to interact with you. We want to just do our Broncos fandom together with you. And so we're thrilled about where this is heading. Big things yet to come. And the future is unfortunately not here yet, Brandon, but I think pieces of it are. We're piecing it together.
We have some fun players to watch. We have Philip Lindsay. That's all. That's the silver lining that I'm clinging to right now. Is I'm loving watching Philip Lindsay and Cortland Sutton. Time to step up. Let's see some more out of that. Let's see what we got in Deshaun Hamilton, and let's try to do something fun the rest of the year.
Let's do it.
Let's at least give the fans a product that's fun to watch.
I like that idea.
And if we can't go to the playoffs, then hopefully we lose some close, fun battles and get a high draft pick. That's what we're rooting for now. We're about to, maybe not officially yet, but pretty soon. Fast approaching. But
it could come.
Thank you, everybody, from Brandon and Sayre Bedinger and the Knights of Den podcast. And we hope to have some more great content coming to you soon in the form of some more short form videos that you can share on Instagram and Twitter and all that good stuff, maybe a little Facebook. And thanks for spending your time with us. Thanks for spending that precious energy and time with your boys, talking Broncos, talking about shared passions here. And we hope you have a great rest of your week. We hope we beat the Texans. We're looking forward to honoring Demaryius. And thanks everybody. And as always, God bless and go Broncos.